Very impressed to see three young gentlemen from CUS there. I mean, when we are trying to improve our education system, those are the young gentlemen that we need to keep in mind. The future employees of Microsoft. I think they will find no difficulty finding a secondment or a work placement here at Microsoft. What we are doing ourselves in our school, we're working very closely with Microsoft. We're also working with a company called War Technology. We're part of Kildare Wicklow Education Training Board, and what we've been working as part of the e-portfolio project mentioned by Minister Gannon earlier, we're at an advanced prototype stage of that. Since the middle of January we started to roll out an electronic portfolio environment. We refer to it as an e-learning portfolio environment because it does a little bit more than just electronic portfolio, and if the technology gods are good, I'll be able to give you a quick demo of that. To set a little context for you, for ourselves, that we take the view as a school, and indeed we take the view within Kildare Wicklow Education Training Board, that if you're trying to make changes and improvements in the education experience of students, you can't do it just by looking at one isolated area. There are at least 4 areas that you have to look at. Front and centre is teaching methodology. The way that teachers go about their business, the way they set their exams, the way they assess their students, the way they shape the education experience of the boys and girls in their care. You also need to look at the overall school curriculum, whether that be mandated at national level, whether it be on the basis of international influence, or whether it will be under a new environment, such as we're experiencing in the junior cycle, where we've got much more flexibility. But with every opportunity comes a great challenge as well. So ourselves, along with our sister schools, are finding the challenge of the new junior cycle front and centre at the moment. But it is an opportunity for us to step back, to re-examine the education experience of our students. And while we're looking at curriculum and curriculum design and curriculum assessment and teacher training, something that sometimes gets left out of the equation is the whole area of learning spaces, the physical space in which students experience the learning environment. As Barry spoke earlier when he was doing his presentation, he showed examples of classrooms from 200 years ago, 50 years ago, physically very, very similar. The student experience might be somewhat different, but the physical environment is an extremely important one as well. And the glue that binds that, or the technology aspect of it, is that we refer to in our school as e-learning, but it encompasses student work, teacher work, the infrastructure that we have, as well as the use of technology for teaching and learning. We think that has the potential to change the relationship between the teacher, the student, and the nature of the curriculum and the learning environment. And for ourselves, we refer to e-learning, key skills, instructional intelligence. Instructional intelligence is a teaching methodology model influenced by the work of Barry Bennett in Canada, and we're part of a cluster of schools and a cluster of ETBs that are working with Professor Bennett over the last number of years. The sole purpose of trying to improve the teaching methodologies, the repertoire of teaching methodologies available to our staff. Key skills refers to the type of work that we're expecting our students to be capable of doing, whether it be literacy, numeracy, communication skills, report writing, and good old-fashioned skills of team working and so forth. And then, of course, as I've already mentioned, that of e-learning, that particular environment that we use to create the learning experience, whether it be in a formal classroom setting or outside it. So the challenge for us as a school and for us as an educational system is, how do you take a scenario like that, which is dynamic, it's collaborative, it's a group of students working, mistakes, misspellings, the whole shebang, it's live, it's messy, it's dynamic. How can you take that type of dynamic, real-world learning experience and use ICT to improve and to harness that? And part of the e-portfolio project is to try and create an environment, a bit like the young gentleman from CUS spoke about, whereby they can use technology to create a collaborative learning environment. So they're collaborating in a classroom environment, but then they're also able to collaborate outside that classroom again. And some of the initial moves that we've been working on is to try and create that environment that looks at the furniture that the students are using, to look at the types of technology that they're using, and to look at the type of work that they're doing, with the overall goal that you would create groups of students who are able to form self-directed learning groups. This room is full of educators, and I'm sure many of you will agree that one of the greatest challenges we're going to face with our students is that of student motivation. Reduced education, third level opportunities for them, perhaps reduced employment opportunities for them as well, and the whole concept of, what is my education for? And that in itself poses one of the great challenges of the junior cycle. It takes away one very significant extrinsic motivator. So how do you actually take the intrinsic motivation for students so that they are actively participating in their work as students? And like many schools that we have worked with in the past and continue to work with, we've all dipped into different types of technology. For ourselves, between 06 and 12, we've looked at different types of technology. And again, like many schools, you could walk into one classroom and you'd see examples of the expert use of technology to support teaching and learning. But it was not ubiquitous. It wasn't the norm in the school. It was just these pockets of excellence. And those are the type of technologies that we explored with in various ways over the last number of years. We probably had the greatest success with SharePoint, on-premise SharePoint 2007, the use of Microsoft Live at EDU and the SkyDrive, now OneDrive. And it is those technologies that we started to get the greatest impact in terms of sharing documentation, even at a very low level of using electronic portfolios. At the lowest level, not necessarily using them as formative assessment tools, but using them as sharing and archiving tools. And those of you who are familiar with the requirements of the State Examinations Commission, the whole concept of provenance, to try and keep track of what is the student work, and to be able to say with some confidence that this represents a genuine effort on the part of the student. And a key part of our own work as well was this notion of a digital toolkit for teachers. I'm not sure if those at the back can see some of the detail of that, but starting at the top right-hand corner, the use of a convertible tablet, the use of a stylus, particularly based on Windows 7 and Windows 8, the use of Office 2013, combined with high-speed broadband, and one particular tool that we find particularly useful, Microsoft OneNote. Alan will talk in a little while about that. They've made fantastic strides in the use of OneNote in their school, and we hope to work with Alan and other schools in terms of promoting the creative use of OneNote by staff and by teachers. We've also dipped our toes in the water, but less successfully, in the use of electronic textbooks. There's a lot of debate over licensing issues and that, so we haven't gone down that particular route yet, nor have we gone down the one-to-one model yet. We're concentrating on using ICT to support collaborative work outside the classroom, project work, research and so forth. The one to your bottom left-hand side there is one particular influence of the instructional intelligence route. It's the use of software to encourage mind mapping, concept mapping, the use of visual diagrams for collaborative work, for planning, for presentation and so forth. And we're continuing to work on that one. And then again, our environment, SharePoint. This is an old diagram. I didn't bother updating it because this is from about 2012. But SharePoint for ourselves has been overtaken by Office 365. It is a far more flexible scenario, and it takes away huge admin costs for ourselves, and indeed admin worries and the lack of expertise that we would at a school. At a school of 520 students, as you can imagine, the availability of a full-time technician is not really on the cards for us. And just the final part of it, the use of a document camera for teaching and learning, a very simple, a very useful tool, and we're encouraging the use of that. In terms of the infrastructure that allows that Office 365 environment to flourish, is a BYOD model, a bring your own device. With Office 365 and with the Office 365 environment, together with a robust wireless network, it really doesn't matter what type of a device a student uses. Now, this is purely for accessing material, but whether it be a phablet, a tablet, whether it be a slate or Surface device or a good old-fashioned laptop, they will be able to access that material. Hopefully I'll be able to show you an example of it, obviously on a laptop, but you should be able to get a sense of what it's like to work with across any devices. It works extremely well with the RTs, works extremely well with any tablet device, and indeed it's adequate on something like a smartphone in terms of accessing material. But when it comes to the more teaching and learning focus aspects of it, like creating student content, as you can imagine, the tablet is, or should I say the smartphone is a little bit limited. As well as trying to overcome the technological challenges, we have the human challenge. We stick with what we're comfortable with, whether we are students or whether we're teachers. And even if you can demonstrate through research, through pragmatic experience, through demonstration at school level that this has a positive impact on teaching and learning, people have very deeply held beliefs. As Douglas Adams said, I don't believe it, prove it to me, and I still won't believe it. Because what you're actually finding is that people have a particular model of teaching in mind, and you're trying to change not only practice, but you're trying to change the way teachers actually think about their practice. And that's actually a far greater challenge. Changing thinking versus changing practice. If you change thinking, the change in practice will come, it will be sustainable, it will be long-term, and it will be real, it will be meaningful. And that's a challenge that we're facing as a school and as an education system. And as part of the branding for it in our school, we refer to e-learning powered by Office 365. So as you can see there are two very big brand names up there on the school there, up there on the board, Skull Conglish and Microsoft, working hand in hand. For ourselves, as educators, if you've had the experience of sitting in a room full of technology people, full of technicians, code writers, Office 365 and SharePoint designers, and you're sitting there as an educator, it's quite an intimidating place to be, particularly when you put a diagram up like this, which is my attempt to try to explain to them what we're trying to support with ICT. It's a flow diagram that shows a learning model that's associated with instructional intelligence. Working from the teacher sets a context for an individual student using a range of resources, online and offline, spoken word, written documentation, and then the student works as part of a small group of 4. Then that group of 4 collaborates with a larger groups of 4 who have also been working on the same topic, and eventually feeding back then into the large group. And when you explain that scenario to a group of technicians, you could hear a pin drop of the silence, because it's alien to them. They can't see a clear way of how they're going to apply technology to this. You show them the next flow diagram, they'll start talking now. They can understand this one much better. And this will be central to the current position we would be in terms of electronic portfolios and how we see it operating for junior cycle. That a teacher prepares a template, it's deposited in a document library, whether it be a text document or a Microsoft OneNote folder. Each individual student is working independently of it, and then they drop that back then into a school assessment folder. So for example, the school assessment workspace, as you can see here, but also with the potential that if there was a Department of Education and Skills or a State Examinations Commission, they can actually take that document, that project work or that portfolio of work, and make that available to State Examinations Commission. One of the advantages of Office 365 is that you can enable it with versioning. In other words, you can track the changes to the document. You can say whether it's version 1, 2 or 3, and that does go a long way to allay the fears of the State Examinations Commission in relation to the provenance of a document. We've had some productive conversations with the State Examinations Commission in terms of prototyping this, and some of our sister schools in KWTB are further down along the line on this particular one. But it's an interesting conversation that they will insist on certain documentation being done in a handwritten form, like for example the CSPE project. And they would quite readily admit that sometimes they get a CSP project which is handwritten, but there would be at least 3 easily discernible different types of handwriting in it. So where's the provenance of that particular document, But they will happily admit that to you. So they are open to this type of conversation, and it's up to us then as a school and as a scheme to try and put in place some of the structures. And here's where the technology people get really excited, because we're in familiar territory now, they're very happy with this, is how you can take a system, an Office 365 system, connected to the school's database, so you can take out data from the school's database such as student timetable, teacher timetable, student user accounts, and create working groups around those, create unique identities and groups of students. And I hope to be able to show you that in action in a moment. And then just for ourselves again, just to mention, just when we're trying to make things accessible and easy for people, both teachers and for students, we just consistently refer to e-learning. So we just put a link on the school's website for e-learning, and then when a student logs on to the system, they're brought to a school landing page. This is logged in as one of our 6-year students. So that's the current school landing page there at the moment, with announcements, upcoming events. The business end of it is over towards the right-hand side, and also across the top menu bar where you'll see Outlook, Calendar, People, Newsfeed, OneDrive and Sites. The OneDrive, as it was previously referred to as SkyDrive and SkyDrive Pro, that's 25 gigabytes of online storage. That's for each particular student. That's under our licensing model. That means that's a space that they can actually store all their own documentation, and they can use that for portfolio development. And then when the time is right, they can share that either with colleagues, with peers, with teachers, or in the previous model we spoke about, the State Examinations Commission. One small design concept we have made a tweak to, this is again just in terms of using the language consistently across an environment like this, is that when a student logs on, the tile they see is referred to as My Learning. And when a student clicks on the My Learning tab, what happens is that the Office 365 environment, through the scripting developed through Microsoft and through Word technologies, interrogates our school database and draws out the students' timetable. So across the left-hand side here then you'll see Christie's timetable for his 6-year group. So each of those tiles represents a link to a website created dynamically for each of those subjects. And each kid would have a unique set of tiles. Well, obviously some students could have similar timetables, but the tiling is determined by their timetable that's drawn from the school's database. And if you take an example there of the 6-year business group, the teacher there is Miss Barrett. These are all created by scripting as well. These are created on the fly, so there's no intervention by the school on their part, but this is something that's created out of the box. Now we would anticipate that perhaps maybe 70 to 80% of our teachers and students would never move beyond those simple environments, because the 3 or 4 main elements of it there. Left hand side there you see the students who are part of the group. Here you have a section here for assignments. That's where students can drop back in material. Now what's interesting about dropping back the material here, there's only one test document in this, but just to give you an idea that you can see across the side here, you will be able to see, excuse me one second, that status there is draft. That means that if 20 or 30 documents were dropped into that assignment box, the student could only see the one that he or she had dropped into it until the status was changed by the teacher. So it's effectively, it's a place for assignments to come back. It retains draft status, and what actually happens then is that it's only when the teacher changes the status that it can be visible to others. So that allows for round tripping, it allows for versioning, and it allows a student to have access to an ongoing document, an ongoing project that they're working on, and it also allows the teacher to provide material. The straightforward section of it here is a good old-fashioned document library. That's where we've been concentrating most of our work, because you can imagine there's a learning curve for ourselves in this particular one. It's only there since the middle of January. But one of the examples here is just a teacher of one of our 6-year business studies teachers, who I see is doing taxation, judging by what's been uploaded there about 4 hours ago. So hard luck to 6-year business studies with Miss Barrett today. They have the thorny issue of taxation to do. Here's where some of the advantages of the Office 365 environment comes to us, particularly if you are not going a one-to-one model as yet, but you're just trying to exploit the existing technology when you've got a cluster of different machines. It means then that the Office 365 environment allows most of the work to be done through a browser. So if you've got any reasonably up-to-date, that's not what you want to see. If you go to any reasonably up-to-date environment, computer system that has an up-to-date browser on it, it should allow you to access the online versions of PowerPoint. So this is an example now of PowerPoint Online. Now that will run fine on a smartphone. It'll obviously run better on a Windows device, but it runs adequately on any devices we tested. We did a BYOD week in the school. We brought in a cluster of different devices. We just said to students, what devices do you have? Just bring them in and let us have a look at them. And I think we had a very strong success rate. There was one particular model of a smartphone that we couldn't get to work adequately. We weren't quite sure what the problem was. To be honest, we didn't invest an awful lot of time in trying to fix it, but it was something then that we said we would return to. Each of the class groups, the subject groups then has their own announcement section, their own calendar section. So it's a small learning environment. It's a small collaborative learning environment that's been created for that class for the purposes of this year to scaffold learning. One of the things that raised an eyebrow with our own teachers was, again, this was done dynamically, is that particular year group, that particular learning space is deleted and recreated afresh at the end of each year. And they're wondering, well, we're putting a lot of material here, and does that material go? We said, yes, it does. All the announcements, yes, everything. The whole thing is deleted and it's recreated. So that raised an eyebrow. But the thinking we had behind it was that if you were a student coming in, particularly say the 5th year, and you're coming into business studies, and you have a subject department site that's been running for 3 or 4 years, you can imagine the hundreds of documents and videos and so forth that will be available there. So it can be very, very intimidating. So you create this dynamically. And what happens is then that they come into a clean site at the year. But what you do have, and this is not created at the end of each year, These run dynamically, and again, these are taken from our school's database. These are subject sites that are created and they continue indefinitely. So say, for example, there is a junior certificate project maths site that runs indefinitely. Any material that is going to be long-term, this is effectively the subject library, and that's available for students in a read-only capacity and for teachers as editors. And then there's a third layer again then, and this is actually the Teachers Hub over here on the right-hand side, and that's a section in relation to junior cycle maths that is only accessible to teachers. So the Teachers Hub continues, the Subject Hub continues, but the class material site, then that's the one that fades away at the end of the year. Well, it doesn't fade away. You've got to run a script, you've got to delete it, you've got to deprecate it, and then you've got to create a new one. So there's a little bit in that one. We haven't actually run through that process yet. It's not something you can test mid-year. So ask me again in July how that particular part of it worked. To have a quick look maybe at what it's like from a teacher's perspective. I'm logged on as an administrator on this particular one, but just to maybe give people a slightly sense of where this could go in terms of developing electronic portfolios, making them more robust and making them more dynamic. I do stress that I think that the vast majority, certainly in the short term, of our teachers and our students will use it out of the box, that they will remain, that those tiles that were there will just remain exactly as they are. Here I'm logged on as a teacher, and it's that same business site that we were looking at there. Now let's say, for example, those of you who are teachers and principals will have heard a lot about school self-evaluation. So let's say, for example, Miss Barrett wanted to do a school-based self-evaluation with their students. They are able to actually add new items to the page, and the ones that are available out of the box are quite significant. The one that's probably going to be fairly useful, I would think, for teachers in the short term would be something like, you see there in the bottom right hand corner there, you can see a survey. So you could actually embed a survey onto the class site, and it could be something as simple: do you like working in groups? Do you like using ICT? Do you prefer taking down notes from the board? How long do you spend doing your homework? How would you rate this particular topic in terms of difficulty? We all know the answer to that one. But you could actually do a small snapshot. So it can be something that can be done that's built into the technology. With training and confidence for our teachers, I think they would avail very much of something similar like that. For ourselves as a school, we can use the same technology to do broader school self-evaluation models, whether it be in relation to the use of instruction intelligence technology or methodologies, or whether it be in relation to anything in relation to external aspects of the school, student satisfaction, teacher satisfaction, parental satisfaction, and we can do those either anonymously or we can do those by way of log on as well. The one that we were working on recently with our own teachers was one of the first things we actually did, and this is one particular to ourselves, moving slightly away from the electronic portfolio aspect of this, but just to emphasize, this acts as a whole system that can be done for school admin as well as for teaching and learning. And one of the first things that we did was create an intranet which is peculiar, which I say is accessible only by teachers. We have sections in it that are related to work that we're doing at the moment. School development planning section, we had 2 sessions there recently, and one of the things that we set up immediately was just to maybe take some of the initial steps in looking at sort of self-evaluation and to be able to get people to log on. About 50% participation rate there at the moment, and actually just ask people, how frequent do they use the following technologies or methodologies in their classroom, to get a snapshot of our school for self-evaluation. That can be taken, it can be exported to Excel. There's a lot of issues that can be used there, a lot of data that can be used there, and that again, that's part of the system. So we've a way to go in terms of what we're doing in terms with our students and teaching and learning, but I would emphasise that we don't want to lose sight of some of the many admin and school development planning aspects that we think that can be used readily through Office 365 as an inherently flexible and robust system. So the longer term roadmap for ourselves, we're very much at the bottom of that pyramid now at the moment. What we're doing is we're looking at document sharing and archiving, moving towards collaborative workspaces, moving towards student portfolios, and then to get to the nitty-gritty part of it, formative assessment artefacts, individualised learning, and then how can we actually create communities of practice. So that we would have a genuine situation like this, where students will be genuinely motivated, genuinely engaged with their teaching and the learning, and not just smiling because I promised them a bun at the end of the photograph. Thank you very much.